It's Tuesday morning, 9:30 in Switzerland. It's Space Cafe web talk time. It's Space Cafe Space Law, no, Law Breakfast with Stephen Freeland time. And this program will begin soon. It's already our third edition today, and we are absolutely happy to keep that going and have this wonderful lineup. But I'll leave that to Stephen later on. Thank you all for joining us for this breakfast roundtable, and to welcome you or to see you in our wonderful coffee house environment today, a very special one, and you will hear about all of that later on. As always, we appreciate your participation and your ongoing feedback. So we only can learn from your feedback and your honest or yeah thoughts to improve our work. I'm Torsten Kriening, your host, your co-host today, and publisher of SpaceWatch.Global. We are a Switzerland-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. I know many of you are already familiar with our websites, the bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and our Space Cafe podcast. Don't miss to listen to the latest episode released yesterday. It's about building your house on Mars. So something very interesting to listen, like all of the podcasts. We also keep our fan shop open for you, where you can support us actively to become a space watcher. The edition 1 has cool items for you, your friends, and the ones you love. Your support is needed to keep our work alive. So we have these cool mugs, and as you can see, these wonderful t-shirts that even fit our great host in Australia very well. So if you have missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our website in the event section and on YouTube. We will host our Space Cafe Law Breakfast with Stephen Freeland live on a bi-monthly basis. And with that, I'm handing over to your host today, Professor Stephen Freeland, live in Sydney, Australia. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Torsten. Hi, everybody. Welcome again to the Space Cafe Law Breakfast. I'm really glad you can join us. As you know, I'm speaking to you from Sydney, Australia, so it's not exactly breakfast time for me, but I have a protein ball, which is my contribution to our culinary experience. But I know that our guests have wonderful breakfasts, and I'm sure they'll be delighted to show you. Welcome to Space Law Breakfast. Let me start by saying on the land that I'm sitting here in Australia, and I'm sure it's the same in many countries around the world, we have a rich heritage of our First Nations and Indigenous people. On the land that I sit, people have lived for 65,000 years, over 2,500 generations of people. And they have 2,500 generations of knowledge and experience and wisdom about space. So space for us is a continuum in terms of learning, and we have so much to learn from those that have gone before us. And I think we should always recognize that as we talk about the culture of space, the wonder of space, the law of space, the religiosity of space, and how important it is. And that's what we plan to do in this program all the time, is look at what's happened in the previous few months, deconstruct it in a certain way. We have amazing people who can talk to us about the legal aspects, but perhaps more than that as well, go beyond the law and talk about how that impacts upon you and me and what we should be doing about it. So welcome. Let me tell you, we've got amazing guests, dear friends, Jenni, Tapio and Alexander Soucek. I'll introduce them formally shortly. But as is the tradition, as Torsten said, we have our breakfast every 2 months in a wonderful and cool cafe somewhere in the world. And Jenni, perhaps you could just tell us where we are.
Yes, I would be happy to do so. So we are in Helsinki now at a cafe called Aalto. And this is named after one of our most famous architects, who is also known for his interior design. So this entire cafeteria is designed by his works, which you can always find one of these from all the homes in Helsinki or in Finland. So this is really a cozy place for us, but it's also located in the biggest bookstore of Helsinki. So as a lover of books, I thought that this would be a perfect place, a combination of design and coffee and as well books to have our morning chat. So I welcome you to Helsinki, at least virtually now.
Thanks, Jenni. I am sure there's a big space section in the bookshop as well.
Yes.
So that's great. Thank you, and it's wonderful to be here in sunny Helsinki. Although I understand it's raining and a bit cold at the moment, but it's great to be here. Okay, well let's delve into the wonders of space and space law with Jenni and Alex. Let's talk about things that have happened. In previous programs on the Space Law Breakfast, we've talked about many issues. We've talked about liability. We've talked about the Artemis Accords and Space Force. We've talked about sovereignty issues, resolving space disputes, the privatization of space activities, astronomy, small satellites. There are so many things going on in space. And that's why I think this program is useful. And it's great to have Jenni and Alex with us. So let me introduce them more formally. They're dear friends of mine, as I said. They're amazing colleagues. They're an inspiration to many people. Jenni first. Jenni Tapio works as the Chief Specialist at the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment in Finland. She represents Finland at COPUOS in all its committees as the head of the delegation for the legal subcommittee. She's currently the Vice Chair of the ESA International Relations Committee, a board member of the ECSL, European Space Law, and previously she worked for 15 years as a practitioner at the law firm Bird & Bird and as an in-house counsel at Airbus and Nokia. Jenni, thank you so much for joining us. And my dear friend Alexander Soucek. Alex, thank you for joining us as well. Alex, the head of Public International Law Division at ESA, the European Space Agency. He represents ESA at COPUOS. He serves as the Secretary of the International Space Station Coordination Committee, is a corresponding member of the International Academy of Astronautics, a member of the International Institute of Space Law and the European Centre for Space Law, and has almost 20 years of experience in intergovernmental organisation. And like all of us, he loves teaching, he loves writing, he loves talking about the wonders of space law. And of course, Torsten, I haven't mentioned you, but hello again, and thank you for hosting us on your wonderful series. And thank you also for the SpaceWatch t-shirt, which arrived today. All right. So another tradition we have in the Space Law Cafe is to ask the question that's on everybody's lips. The question is this: if you were to describe the wonders of space law in one word, what would it be? So previous guest, Chris Newman, thought space law was expansive. Donna Lawler thought it was extraterrestrial. Tanya Masson-Swan described it as infinite. PJ Blount as innovative. Torsten has used the word ambiguous. And I've used the word intergenerational. So that's many different facets of space law. So I'm interested, Jenni, Alex, what are your thoughts? Jenni?
Well, those of you who know me know that it's very difficult for me to restrict myself to one word in general. So I will try my best. And I've chosen here the word cooperative. And this really means different things for me in space. Of course, I mean, I would want to say that I'm just fascinated about space law, and I'm sure that everyone else here is too. But I think the word cooperative really refers to these primary mechanisms of cooperation, first of all, like the United Nations Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, which is really instrumental in furthering this cooperative side of space law. And this is what we've seen from the outset. And this is what I hope as a proponent of such mechanisms to accompany us for the further development. But also I think this implementation side of space law between all the actors and all the levels really requires the attitude of cooperation. I think we have this even through the private governance mechanisms such as commercial contracts, which are a good example of cooperation. So I think these are just really thoughts on the cooperative side of space law, and I don't think that they are then precluding competition or hindering innovation, but rather complementing that. So that's
your word, one word.
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks, Jenni. Thank you so much. Alex, I'll turn to you, but before you give me your answer, you have a very special treat to show us, your typical Austrian breakfast, yes?
Well, Steve, it's, shall I say, it's not typical, especially the form is not typical, but the fact that we like to have a good breakfast in a coffee house, in a cafe, that is typical indeed. If you think even in French, they call it the viennoiserie, the things from Vienna when they talk about the little soft, sweet bread. So I made such a soft, sweet bread. I oven baked it tonight. It's not little though, but it's the shape of a legal paragraph, the logo of our Space Law Cafe. It smells wonderful. No worries. Austrians don't eat that much, one person per one breakfast. So this is for the family for the weekend. But I thought I'd bring it along here. And just that you see it's real, I will start to destroy it now so you can indeed eat law. And that's hopefully a new experience.
Looks wonderful.
It will give you energy for the program. So Alex, before you eat that delicious piece of bread, your word, please.
Well, you know what? The very, very first reaction, but that's not the word I chose in the end, was it's fun. Space law is incredible fun. And I mean this not in the sense of funny, but in the sense of it's wonderful and exciting. However, then I thought I should probably, seeing all these very good and clever descriptions, come up with something a little more intellectual. And I thought and I pondered. And in the end, I found a word that I like because I think that's how I want to describe space law. And it's a little bit different than the others, but I hope it complements the thoughts of Jenni and of all of you. And that word is, it's reassuring. Space law is reassuring. And I tell you very briefly what I mean with this. First of all, it's reassuring to have space law in the first place. Sometimes I think and I wonder, how would the space world, space flight look like if states hadn't agreed on some basic rules half a century ago? There would be no rules to guide the behavior of states. And then I think it's comforting to know that there are rules. It's reassuring to know that law accompanies new discoveries, that there is a place for all of us to come together and to discuss law and rules and behavior, expectations, fears, hopes. It is reassuring that there are so many enthusiastic people studying space law, discussing, writing about it. And as ironic or strange as it may sound, to me, it's really reassuring that there is so much debate, criticism on space law, that there are activities, products, things coming out of those debates, because this means that space law is alive. It's a living thing. And, you know, in our modern times, especially in these times that we are forced to be in a virtual cafe rather than in a real one with our friends, a little bit of stability and structure and community for me is very reassuring. And that's space law.
Oh, Alex, that's fantastic. And I think both cooperative and reassuring really encapsulates the joy, the optimism, but also the incredible need for space law. So thank you both for adding to our growing library of descriptors but they both go to the top of the pile. They're great. So thank you. Reassuring and cooperative. Well, we're going to follow those themes a bit in our discussions because with all of this in mind, we're going to look at a couple of themes today. The first is about multilateralism, because we're soon about to engage again in COPUOS discussions at Legal Subcommittee starting next week. How does multilateralism work? Does it work? What other governance models might there be? So how does cooperation work about that? And then we're going to talk about issues and challenges, space debris, space traffic management, collision avoidance, and hopefully, Alex, we can come up with some reassuring ways that that space helps us here. But we'll see. So let's explore this. As I mentioned, we've had already scientific and technical subcommittee for COPUOS a few months ago. And as everybody is aware, next Monday we begin legal subcommittee, and there are many important and challenging issues that are being discussed. The members of the COPUOS, 96 member states, together with the permanent observers and some observer states, are all going to meet together and discuss really important issues, issues that really go to the heart of how do we move forward as a community in the regulation of space. So I'm really interested in everybody's perspective about what is the role of multilateralism? Does it work? How does it enable the continuing development of frameworks? How does that help? And should there be other types of governance mechanisms or models instead, or to complement, or whatever? So I think each of us here have a different perspective. Maybe Jenni, I'll ask you first, perhaps the perspective as a head of a delegation from a national government as to your view on multilateralism as a governance model for space.
Thank you, Stephen. That's really a perfect question. I think it's a great place for us to speak about this now that we are looking at it a bit from different angles, but perhaps already also sharing some of the views. I mean, I'm just thinking here that I'm reassured by cooperation that takes place in COPUOS, so that I'm a firm believer in this international multilateral process. And I know that, of course, there are criticism and there always has to be debate, like Alex just said, that, I mean, we have to always look at the things, how we do them, that whether that's the most or the best way to really to forward the development of space law and the cooperation between all of us, and not only at intergovernmental level, but of course with all the space actors. And I think just that now when we are heading towards the legal subcommittee, which is of course always the most wonderful time of the year, that we get together for 2 weeks in Vienna and drink the good Viennese coffee. I as a Finnish coffee drinker, we drink most coffee in the world, but that's really not the same quality. But I think that this element of cooperation between the delegates, of permanent observers, of the member states, of the academia, all coming together to this wonderful atmosphere that we have in the boardroom D, usually now in the virtual mode during the scientific and technical subcommittee, then going to a hybrid mode, whatever that will in practice be, is nevertheless fantastic, so that we don't have to cancel like we did last year, because I think this is the worst we can have, not to have this information exchange, not to have this networking, which I find that is really the key for the success in the committee. I know that many are saying, like, why do you have to be there for 2 weeks? Isn't that too long time? And how can someone afford that time? But I think that's really the time that it's really needed to get to know each other, get to know the views of all the delegations, and then to come to this consensus, because I think this is an aspect that has to be highlighted from our work, that it takes time, but when we come to a conclusion, this is also something quite strong, that we've actually deliberated on this topic for a long time, but then we've come to a decision that everyone can agree to, and sometimes even silence is a good result. That in the sense that when we come to that point that no one objects, that's good. But of course, there is probably ways that we can further work how we actually do that in practice. And I think now this in a way allows us this virtual or hybrid mode to let's say develop our methods of work, because now everything will be live cast from Vienna. So it really allows for the wider society to look into that work, to really see how the deliberations are, how does it work to do space law in practice in Vienna. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity for everyone to really chip in into that work. But just perhaps a small remark on the, I mentioned the timing in a sense that we only meet for the legal subcommittee once a year, which is perhaps now that we are talking about the pace of things happening, should we perhaps meet more often? That's the case in many other international organizations. Like at ESA, we meet more often with a shorter time, but then of course that allows for us to speak on regular basis. So of course this is one idea that that we can always kind of reinforce, that working together and exchanging also throughout the year, and not only at the occasions. But this that we meet once a year means for a national delegation that there's a lot of preparation to do for all these, both the subcommittees and for the main committee. And this element that is also a bit of surprise than what the others are going to be saying. The first week is always this, that we hear from the others, the statements and the ideas. And here we talked earlier as well about the ITU process, that there when the World Radio Conference is in a much more, there's longer periods in between, but there's a lot of preparation, and as well there's perhaps sometimes more transparency as to what everyone else is thinking in between. And this could be something that we can probably also develop within COPUOS. But as it currently stands, I think it's a wonderful intergovernmental process that allows for states to interact. And then here I just mentioned the coordination that we have through ESA, ESA being the permanent observer for COPUOS, and it allows us member states to coordinate our positions at the European basis in our International Relations Committee. And I guess Alex probably has some words on that process as well, but I think this is really something that allows us in the preparations that we currently are dealing with.
Thanks, Jenni. Alex, yes, I mean, you come from a different perspective. You probably agree with many of the sentiments, but you look at COPUOS from the perspective of an intergovernmental organization, a really important space actor, a permanent observer. So you have slightly different roles to play, perhaps, in COPUOS. So what's your view on multilateralism? Because you have your own multilateral process, or slightly less than global multilateralism already at ESA. So how does that fit in with the global multilateralism at COPUOS?
Yeah, well, that's indeed an interesting position. We have this privilege as ESA to be ourselves a multilateral body, much smaller. You said it, Stephen, 22 member states and a few associate members and cooperating states. But overall, if you look at 96 members of COPUOS, that's about a quarter of that. And if we look at the number of countries in the world, that's even much less, because even in COPUOS you have roughly half of the countries assembled. So it's a small regional international organization, but it's an important one. And there is one fundamental difference, of course. It's not only a coordination forum like COPUOS is, but ESA itself is a space actor, is launching rockets, is operating satellites, is distributing data. And this adds a a layer of complexity of a different kind, than compared to COPUOS. But let me come back a moment to COPUOS. Jenni just mentioned it, and you mentioned it. Next week we have the legal subcommittee, and if I might just take that word that I said before, it's really so reassuring to think on Monday. Now, this year it's still a bit difficult because of the pandemic, but let's leave COVID for once completely aside. It's reassuring to think on that Monday in spring, there is a big room on the 7th floor in the Vienna International Center, and you go up there, and when you exit the elevator, you meet space law experts and friends of all around the world, familiar faces, and you sit together and you work. And Stephen, and also the audience, let's just imagine for one moment that no such thing than COPUOS existed. Imagine, travel back in time to 1957, launch of the first artificial satellite. COPUOS didn't exist back then. It was the first time assembled as an ad hoc committee in 1958. How different would the world look? But since 1958, we have this luxury to have every year a place to meet, a structure. We have the wonderful colleagues from the Office of Outer Space Affairs preparing that, providing the secretariat, and all of us meet there. We know each other from there, we talk, and the same in the audience. Sometimes we forget that when we criticize the processes at COPUOS. And criticism, by all means, is very important. It's vital to criticize. Otherwise, you build a crust and you don't move anymore. But it's very easy to criticize. I always then ask, so what's your alternative suggestion? And, the alternative suggestions of making this process completely different are not many. And that's the reason why we still have this process. But as Jenni said, there is now also a window of opportunity to change things, not fundamentally. We don't need a revolution, but an evolution. And for example, meeting more often could be an interesting thing. It comes, however, also with disadvantages. Certain states might not be in a position to send experts 6, 7, 8 times a year somewhere. And it's also a huge organization. The virtual world might offer some opportunity. This afternoon, for example, we have the coordination meeting with our ISA member states for the legal subcommittee. Jenni will be there. It starts in a few hours, but it's just a click away. It's just a click away for dozens of experts all across Europe to discuss, to prepare, to exchange. And this is, I think, really, this is an opportunity because, of course, and with this I end, Stephen, the bigger these structures get, now we are at 96 members and rising, and that's good, but the bigger this structure gets, the more diverse the interests of actors get, from private to state actors, different private actors, individuals, the more difficult it is naturally to converge on common ground. That's no surprise for anyone, but even the more it is important to remember that law is a living thing, and the mechanisms creating law at the end of the day are also a living thing. And we have to keep it alive. And just to quote, because I said this living thing, I think of, the Electric Light Orchestra, this one song where I said, it's a living thing, it's a terrible thing to lose. And I think that's a very nice catchword. We shouldn't lose what we have in space law coordination.
I couldn't agree more with both of you. And it felt as if we almost had a lost year, didn't it, when legal subcommittee was cancelled last year on many issues that we're all involved with, but just generally that spirit of getting everybody in the same room. Sure, there are tough discussions going on and tough negotiations, but getting them in the same room to talk about common themes really did propel things forward. And I agree with you both, and I think we should be meeting more and we should be finding innovative ways of doing that. From my perspective, I have a coordination role, a moderation role in one of the discussion groups that's going to take place next week. And as good as it is that we're just a click away, that makes life even harder, I think, in another way. Because as Jenni said, and as you said, Alex, you know, the beauty of it is getting out of the lift and seeing people from all of these countries. Having that coffee, coffee seems to be a big theme at our cafe breakfast, but having that coffee with the delegations from countries all around the world, being able to really sit down and work out issues in the margins, because with that diversity of membership, 96 countries, and it's growing dramatically. I think when I started going maybe 10 or 12 years ago, there were about 45 or 50 countries. So it's doubled almost in the last 10 years. And that says something about space, and it's growing dramatically. And if you look at the member states of COPUOS, they are truly global. And they operate in different ways. There are political blocs, but they also represent their own interests. And so the notion of consensus becomes more challenging and more challenging. And that's harder where you don't have that opportunity to sit down with people on the sidelines and really talk about issues through. That said, consensus, even though people criticize it as being a compromise and lowest common denominator, consensus, as Jenni said, is a really powerful thing, because once you achieve it, it really means something. It means that everybody has had a buy-in to the discussion, and that, you know, there is, you know, strong political, moral, and dare I say even legal value in some of the decisions that are then made on that consensus basis. So I think, you know, multilateralism is a powerful, powerful thing. COPUOS is a really important institution. Nobody doubts its worth. As you say, Alex, where would we be without it? I agree. But, you know, we constantly need to be thinking about how to make things better and opening it up and making it even more open and even more inclusive and even more transparent. So thank you both. So our reality check, as always, Torsten, you know, does all this make sense to you? I mean, when you hear us talk about the wonders and joys of multilateralism and COPUOS, notwithstanding criticisms, do you think that you speak to so many people about space? Do you think the system we have serves us well for the future of, let's say, sustainable space activities?
Thanks, Alex, to the analogy with the ELO song, the Electric Light Orchestra song. So I mean, I could use the ESC, the European Song Contest, as a model for Europe, but I would say with the latest experience from last weekend, I doubt it will work. But hey, Jenni, chapeau to Finland, one of my favorite songs. So even you didn't win it. So, however, back to the topic, back to your question. So I'm a big supporter of the UN system and a big believer in it. When talking a few weeks back with Alexandra Vallée from the ITU, I learned that at the ITUs, the International Telecommunication WRCs, World Radio Communication Conference Coordination. So with 190 plus countries involved, that delegates coming back to their governments with results, always, because it is telecommunication and they can't go away with it without a result for their country. So at COPUOS, with a bit more than half of these countries that we see there, it seems space is still a nice thing to have for governments. So yes, it does make sense, but it needs to be more binding, in my opinion. But maybe you also can give us non-lawyers, an insight how decisions will be taken and how does this process work. I mean, as Jenni said, yeah, we are sitting together and we're coming together, we're preparing that, but from an idea to a result, okay, and in the 10 years in between, how does that work? So maybe you can enlighten us a bit on that. And I'm quite sure you all are able to do so. That was my reality check.
Yes, well, it's always good to hear your reality check too, because sometimes, you know, we are in love with what we do, and it's always good to hear that perspective. Jenni, Alex, how do you respond to Torsten's challenge there?
If I may, just to jump into the thought as well on I mentioned a bit on the preparation side. I think, to my understanding, I don't go to the WRC myself, but as I've understood from my colleagues, between those 4 years when decisions are actually made, there's a lot of preparations and perhaps a bit more transparency about what others think. And statements, for example, are made available to the others to see. I think it's few weeks before the actual meeting starts. So in a way, other delegations have the opportunity to see what others think. So in a way, once you come to the place, you are already a bit knowledgeable about the positions of others and how you could probably bridge the views between your delegation and the others to arrive to a decision. So I don't know, I mean, we have, of course, always the opportunity, and especially now also during the legal subcommittee, to develop the processes within our committee, and perhaps we can somehow, with better information sharing, already do a bit on that side, so that we could quicker come into these solutions. But I think it's a hard question. I mean, this comparison with the World Radio Conference and COPUOS, because they are also, to my thinking, so different. But I think we should nevertheless learn from that process and to take that as a good example of how to develop our work and decision making at COPUOS. But just to quickly, maybe Torsten, you asked that how does the decision-making process actually take place? And I think we have this wonderful opportunity this year through this, you mentioned, Stephen, that you are co-moderating the scheduled informal consultations, that we have the opportunity to deliberate on the establishment of a working group, which would then allow us to really get into the exchange of views on substantive matters relating to space resources topic, which is a very topical issue also to the wider community. But this, in a way, discussion necessitates to have such a working group first, so that we can really concentrate on this topic, and a decision has to be made before that moment. So of course, here I think it's the cooperation by everyone to really to work towards this consensus and to find common ground, so that we could have this opportunity to really to go into these further talks.
Yeah, I agree, and certainly, as you know, Jenni, there's a lot of goodwill about this issue, at least in terms of the way forward from a process perspective. But we shall see. You know, 96 countries in a room is a big issue, but hopefully we can move forward. Alex,
sure.
Your thoughts on Torsten's pushback a bit on and that comparison between the WRC and the ITU process and COPUOS.
Yeah. First, Torsten, thanks for pushing back. The problem is always the same. The more you are into a process, the more snowblind or colorblind you get, because you're just surrounded by your likes, by the same experts, and you're fascinated by the topic, and then it's very easy to say it's all wonderful. So the more we are being pushed, the more movement there is. That's great. And you said something very interesting, and I want to go on that. You said space seems to be or have been a nice to have, compared to, for example, frequencies that all countries and all individuals use all the time in daily life, from morning till evening, from mobile phone to airplane to stock exchange transactions. I think space was a nice to have. It was a geopolitical toy in a way, half a century ago. But it has changed, and we're seeing right now that it's changing at a dramatic pace. And we all know that, all of us, space people, lawyers or non-lawyers, we perceive, we feel the excitement around it, but also governments see that. It's years that they see that. The investment, for example, we see in ESA, the excitement, the interest also of the people out there, the taxpayer ultimately, because the governments work ultimately with taxpayers' money to make things happen. Then you have the private investors, but there's so much going on. And space today, I wouldn't call it a nice to have anymore. It's a fundamental. And that will impact also the way the governance schemes are evolving, because yes, from now on, we are more pressed, and that's good, to achieve something, to set behavioral rules and guidelines, be it now at bilateral, regional, multilateral, global level, doesn't matter. There is for each question and problem a good solution. But this is really, I think, something that has changed a lot, and that's a very, very positive development. And Stephen, if you allow, because we talk about multilateralism, and at the other end there's this minilateralism, right? Or even individualism. And then there's this question, what is better? Probably the truth, as so often, is somewhere in between, because you need both. Not each and every question needs to have 200 countries of the world consenting, but the right questions need the consent. And the thing is, every new initiative, no matter what, and even if it's a new treaty, a new spacecraft, anything, starts at the very beginning in the head of one person. One individual somewhere on this planet has an idea, a thought. And from there, the ball starts rolling. From that one desk, it gets bigger and bigger. And the art of international cooperation and international coordination is to get this thought from the head of one person on one desk, literally speaking, into the room of the conference room of the United Nations, and from there take flight in reality. So the art is the process of making this happen. And we've seen it, for example, now preparing the legal subcommittee, we see it every day. And this process is so important. And it needs individuals, it needs small groups, it needs bigger groups. I like to see it as a mosaic picture, The closer you go, the more fragmented it seems. You have here a little bit and here a little bit and here a little bit. But if you step back, there is a picture appearing within a frame. And that frame for us lawyers is still the Outer Space Treaty, or call it public international law, more generically speaking. And within that frame, we're allowed to build here a bit, there a bit, but for a common picture. Because if we wouldn't have that frame, it would just be a pile of stones that we're putting there, unrelated. And this is what is to be avoided.
No, look, I agree completely. Space is everywhere. Space in every country, certainly in my country, Australia, is considered part of critical infrastructure. So it's no longer, Torsten, wouldn't it be nice to have? It's vital for every country of the world, for every community of the world. And therefore, as Alex and Jenni have said, we need to step up and take that challenge and react to the technology and make important decisions on the really big issues. And then perhaps there's some flexibility in how that's implemented, but the really big issues, we need to have that global consensus. But as Alex has said, of course, there are different layers of the way that people look at how we might regulate things. But in the end, you need to have consensus on those really big issues amongst all of the stakeholders. And I think that's where multilateralism is so important. I'm conscious we're running out of time already. Isn't that ridiculous? Torsten, maybe one or two questions on this issue, but I want to then talk about debris very quickly, because of course that's been in the news. So maybe, is there one question we could talk to, and then I'll quickly move on to debris?
I think we have some interesting questions here from Vienna, from Christian Anfried. Or does EU send representatives to COPUOS or compared with either? How is OISPA going to be presented in COPUOS as European Union or via selected member states such as Czech or due to the OISPA seat in Prague? I'm quite sure that's a very easy question for you to answer. Hopefully, maybe.
Just to answer briefly in the interest of time, because there's one general answer. Yes, both the European Union and ESA are permanent observers at COPUOS. So we sit next to each other, actually, physically.
Okay, but the new organization like OISPA or so, does they have a seat or are they represented by?
Well, EUSPA is being created now or has been created now, so that's a fairly new development. But the observer itself at COPUOS is the European Union, then sending whoever they feel like it's ESA, and then for the legal subcommittee, it's representatives of the legal department and the international relations department, and for the scientific subcommittee, it's some other people, but to the outside world, it's the institution, the organization. Then if in the future EUSPA plays a separate role within the EU observer, that's not on me to answer, because I'm not representing the EU.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. And thank you, Valentin. Just to say also, other organizations, institutions can apply, of course, for permanent observer status, and that's happening all the time. You see new permanent observers. So over time, we will see more permanent observers. I'd like to move on, if I may, because for time, move to the question of debris, because we've heard so much about debris in the last few weeks. Everybody knows that a piece of debris quite dramatically was described as tumbling towards Earth, and should we be worried, etc. And it fell, the part of the Chinese Long March 5B rocket fell in the ocean. We've had SpaceX debris falling in the United States. Of course, we can all do pilgrimages to Yellowknife in Canada, where in 1978 we had the Russian Cosmos 954 falling on Canada and with a nuclear power source on board. Even humble Australia, and this put part of Australia on the map in 1979, the 77-ton, can you imagine, Skylab space station, US space station, tumbled and crashed in Western Australia and left debris everywhere. And so this is an issue that's been going on for a long time, but there's a trend. I don't want to focus on any one particular incident because it's more the trend. Alex, Jenni, perhaps Alex first, what's all this about and what do we do about debris and how will it work? Alex.
You know, Stephen, it's interesting that you just mentioned Skylab. We just heard in the last weeks of a rocket stage, in that case, a Chinese rocket stage. You mentioned Skylab, a US space station that came back. And if I think back on that event, I mean, in 1979, the Skylab re-entry was the opposite of a political issue. It was an international media event. It was a hype. T-shirts were sold and hats were sold, and there was a Skylab insurance being offered. And the San Francisco newspaper actually at that time offered him a prize, $10,000 for the first one who would bring a piece of Skylab within 72 hours after re-entry back. And actually an Australian citizen, if that story is true, managed to do that and got the prize in the end.
Commercial space, Alex, commercial space. You know,
absolutely.
But I was going to say, you know that the local council sent a littering fine to NASA later on. So, I mean, we looked at that as, wow, let's put Australia on the map. This is exciting. You know, we weren't really worried about it, as you said. Why is it so different now?
There are many reasons for that. Of course, there's always a practical or the reality side of it, and then there's a political layer to it. And we know that, of course, since 1979, the space debris problem itself, population of objects in space has multiplied by so many. So, but still, it's important, I think, for all of us in this cafe to always make a reality check when we see these headlines, as important as they are. A reality check first, what debris actually reaches Earth. And this is not to say debris is not a problem. On the opposite, I'm deep into it, but a reality check on the headlines. Most debris doesn't reach the surface of Earth because it burns up during atmospheric re-entry. Most of what reaches the Earth's surface doesn't impact over land statistically because 2/3 of the Earth is covered by water. Most of that what reaches land doesn't impact inhabited zones because, again, that's the minority of land masses that are inhabited. And most of that actually impacts inhabited zones will actually statistically not harm anyone. So that doesn't mean it could happen tomorrow. Statistics is just numbers and guessing at the end of the day. But it's important always to keep things also, to look at things from an angle of reality, of engineering, of mechanics. And having said that, I believe, like many of us, space debris is a very serious problem. Maybe not so much for on-ground casualty risk, which if it happens would be dramatic, but mostly in outer space, outer space where we have potentially dramatic knock-on effects of collisions there, debris clouds developing, evolving, services suddenly not being available anymore, people working and living in the future in space who might be threatened by debris. So all this is really a call for action, absolutely, and we need to have legal and behavioral rules and mechanics. Thankfully, we have already several of them in place, kickstarted, by the way, by engineers. If I look at the IADC space debris mitigation guidelines that made then the way to the UN, but this was space agencies talking about a technical problem, not from the political or legal angle. Technical problem, technical neutral solutions, which allowed them to define a catalog of these solutions. And that became so popular, as we all know, that in a slightly changed format, it made its way as the UN Space Debris Mitigation Guidelines to the General Assembly of the United Nations. And today, national lawmakers, legislators, refer to these guidelines, saying, if you want a license, you private actor, you have to show how you comply with these internationally recognized guidelines and standards. So we see how an engineering product in the arc of 10, 20 years becomes an element of domestic and law and international behavior. I think that's a very fascinating and very reassuring development in a way.
Yeah, we need, I agree, we need to sit down and understand and listen to the engineers and the scientists. You know, law or regulation or the fashioning of behavior can't be done in, pardon the pun, in a vacuum without actually understanding the science and the engineering. We need a lot to learn. Jenni, this sort of gets back to our theme about multilateralism and perhaps national interests. So we've got a liability convention. We understand that would deal with collisions or debris hitting the ground, but that only kicks in, of course, after the damage is done. And ideally, as Alex said, we want to avoid the damage. So who should be responsible for debris management? How can we avoid these risks? You know, it's really tough because we're doing more and more in space. So can I, seek your thoughts and wisdom on this point?
I think it's a huge question that would require, I think, few cafe sessions. But I think just building on what Alex said on the reality, once we think how international space law is built on the notion of space activities being ultra hazardous, and then the liability convention responding to that, but as you say, only after a damage has actually occurred. While I think when we think of, from example, from a national regulator's perspective, you need to act so that you don't get into that situation. And I think there are then other considerations how you consider this risk mitigation. And one avenue is, of course, this international space debris mitigation guidelines, as mentioned here, so that we, in a way, act preventively. So in a way, we cannot consider that we then only start to react when we are at that situation when damage is either just about to occur or already has occurred, and then only react on that. But rather we have to act prior. And I like just to look into another dimension, data protection, where we have this idea that it's by design. So you have to already at the outset start to consider such topics when you build your systems, when you start to do your projects, you start to have these ideas in your mind. And it's the same with space debris, of course. This is an idea that and that has to be from technical, but also from the regulatory level, be there already from the outset. So this idea that how do we, first of all, prevent space debris or mitigate those occasions where it can occur, but as well start to think how do we deal, what do we do with the existing debris that's already there. And I think the entire issue on space debris is of course global one, and it's on everyone. And there is a good example from the multilateral side, the long-term sustainability guidelines of COPUOS, that in a way put this obligation on everyone. I mean, of course, primarily to the states and intergovernmental organizations, but then through the national space laws, which can then refer to these guidelines as an obligation to all the actors that are within the jurisdiction of the state. So in a way, then this multilateralism goes through national space laws, but of course we know national space laws are not in every country. So we have to not to stop here, but already also think about more international solutions that would be applied in each and every country and at the global level, because that's essentially what this problem is, a global problem and not a national one.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because when you look at those countries that are developing national law, and they do it for different national space law, they do it for different reasons, but many countries do it to develop an industry, to develop entrepreneurship, to generate revenues and all of that. So very much a national interest focus, which obviously what you'd expect governments to do. But as you said, the issues that arise from activities have global implications. And so national law has to be this balance, doesn't it? Between, on the one hand, being a good international citizen, complying with your obligations, ensuring that you comply with all of these important principles and guidelines that you've both referred to, but on the other hand, encouraging the industry. And it's an interesting balance. Different countries have different approaches to it. But in the end, I think there's an increasing recognition that we really need to look at these as global issues and attack it, in a global way. Would you both
Definitely
agree with that?
Just to say, they are not in contradiction necessarily, by no means. They can still both live one and in parallel, and national space laws can then also help in creation of the markets and in enhancing innovation, also by such regulations as space debris mitigation.
There was actually one interesting aspect that Jenni, you just mentioned, and then Stephen, and I tried to put those two words together when you spoke about the liability. So the obligation in a way to compensate, to clean up the damage you have caused, and sustainability, right? In a way, 60 years ago, liability was one of the key issues that was being discussed. What happens if something happens? And you can see this as a reactive approach. Once something has happened, there has to be a reaction to that. And today we discuss sustainability, how to keep space and space flight possible, sustainable, clean for future generations and for ourselves. And that is anticipatory. And in a way that very nicely shows also the evolution of space law thinking over the decades, because in the beginning it was just very few doing it, and all the others were, let's say, afraid of the consequences and excited at the same time. Today, it's almost everyone doing it, and we have learned that we have to be a bit more anticipatory to guide our behavior in certain directions, not to control it necessarily in a negative way, not to forbid, not to disable, but to make sure that we can still enable and allow the day after tomorrow. And that, for me, is a paradigm change, if you so wish, in the way you think space law over the years.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've always thought of international law in general terms as reactive, but now we have to be a lot more, well, you say anticipatory or proactive, recognizing the issues, recognizing that business as usual is not going to work anymore, and we really have to move forward. I agree. I know we've already been talking for an hour, but I'd love some questions, Torsten. We have so much that we can talk about, but let's give the audience a chance with a couple of questions before we wrap up. So, Torsten, what have you got for us?
Absolutely. If I may jump in with some views that I like to share here before coming to a few of these wonderful questions we got from our audience. I mean, you talked about the LTSE, the long-term sustainability adaptation, but where are we in terms of the ratification? I mean, you know that better than we do, that there is this delta in between, that if we can take actions and they're enforceable, then they're real. And we had this discussion in a few of the talks earlier, but there's still a gap in between, because we don't do that because we are nice. We have to do that because it is our obligation, and we have to come to this point. And I mean, you talked about space resources as this year's topic. I mean, that will raise another, or will open another huge area of debate for that. And my general topic or view on that, for coming to the question, we have to overcome as nations our national focus, partially our neo-nationalistic approach, what we see popping up more and more, and aim for a higher goal. That may sound naive from my end, but with the pandemic, we have learned in the last 2 years how fragile humanity is. And we didn't thought about it, and nobody had it in his risk analysis before, this dramatic that we see now. But we also see that no one stands alone or can break out of this environment. So, and we have other overarching challenges like climate crisis and so on that we have to address. And space can play a role if we protect space to play a role in that. I had a fantastic talk earlier this week with Will Marshall from Planet in my Space Café 33 Minutes about the European Green Deal. And he said very clear, Europe is doing absolute fantastic on the foresight of what can be done. And we can support it with the assets that we have today. Let's work on that together. So, and I think we have to overcome that. This nationalistic focus. It's my number of doses that I have in my country, and you don't get it, but we have to get vaccinated first. I mean, we have seen it in practice, and I think this delta that has to be overcome. And I mean, we have a number of questions. One is the current Starlink discussion with Viasat, and they have the practical implication. I mean, it's a very very detailed question, but it comes out. And Valentin asked it. I mean, and the point is does terrestrial environmental law could be applied to space? That is the underlying thing. Then with the liability convention and the return and rescue, has there been cases that American, Chinese rockets, whatever, has to be returned? I mean, there's at least one thing I can imagine I can remember from a Russian satellite parked in Canada and was returned. I mean, of course, after many people have seen it, but that's in action. So I will stop here because, I mean, we get the red flags from our production team already. And I know they're very strict. They're Germans. Yeah.
Oh, look, great questions. But I can't resist. We have the world's expert with us in negotiating the return of space debris. Alex, you've actually had to do this, haven't you? I know we haven't got much time, but tell us quickly that story.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. Quickly. Back in 2012, we launched a rocket, Vega, the first flight of a Vega rocket. 5 years later, the AVUM part of the upper stage returned. It was in an elliptical orbit, I think 400 per 1,400 kilometers. And 5 years later, as I said, it re-entered. And then 2 tanks were found in southern India in a village, 2 rocket tanks, and it turned out that they probably belonged to that ESA qualification flight. And so we were tasked to bring those 2 pieces back because it's very important to analyze them and to, verify the re-entry algorithms and so on and so forth. And this was highly interesting. So we got in contact. This landed on my desk, literally. We got in contact with the Indian authorities. And it was one of the very few times that we could activate the rescue and return agreement, because as you say, many call it the rescue agreement, but it has a second word in it, and it's the return agreement, the return of space objects. And India is a party to that, and ESA has declared acceptance of the rights and obligations. But that was not all. We had also to prove ownership of those 2 tanks. Now, this is also not so simple. Of course, you can explain, but how do you actually prove that a burned up piece of a tank found in southern India comes from your rocket that was launched many years ago? And there a little coincidence helped us, because that re-entry was actually part of an international coordinated re-entry observation campaign at the IADC together with ESA. So we refined all around international cooperation with international partners the re-entry trajectory of that AVUM upper stage. And that's why with a very, very high degree of likelihood, we could say that those 2 pieces actually belong to that object that re-entered. And we showed also why we are owners, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually then the Indian authorities, we had a wonderful cooperation with them. They were really, really also welcoming in that sense. And they helped us to get these 2 pieces out. It was exciting. You cannot just walk with 2 burnt rocket tanks to the airport and check them in and fly them back. So this had the customs issues and export control issues, and I don't know what. We had a lot of papers to fill, but it was an emotional moment, I tell you, standing there at ESTEC when the truck came in with those 2 tanks who had a cosmic journey of many years behind them, and in the end came back to us. And now they are on display in ESA. I walk by every now and then and think back of that story.
Well, that is a reassuring story. That is a reassuring story. Thank you. Jenni, your last thoughts on everything we've talked about on how we move forward on debris, and you've heard Alex's story. Does the system work, or do we have to do more?
I say that it works, and I'm just so excited to be part of this journey and this wonderful time when we can actually see these events making space law alive, as Alex said before. And I think this that Torsten mentioned, the LTS implementation, is now really something that we can pave the way for the future and for that sustainable use of outer space, using your intergenerational word as well, to really to go forward, to make the space usable for us now and for all these socio-economic reasons, but as well to preserve that to our children and to the generations coming after us. So I think this is a wonderful time, and it's great to be able to actually do something about it.
Oh, that's a great way to end the program. Jenni, Alex, thank you so much. I hope for the audience you found this discussion interesting and reassuring, and shows the cooperation of space, but it also shows the relevance of space. And that's really why we're here, to show that space is so important to us. A whole range of facets of space have to be considered, and we're here in this little discussion to try to just break it down a bit and walk you through it. So I hope you found it interesting. Torsten, I'll pass it over to you, but just one more time, Jenni, Alex, you're dear friends, but you're just extraordinary people, and your insights were so great today. Thanks for taking the time. I know how busy you both are, and of course I'll see you next week virtually in Vienna. But thank you again for taking the time. Torsten, the floor is yours.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it as always, being part as a non-lawyer in this discussion here. I think, Stephen, you should mention that we have something planned for our audience in 2 months, because it's a bi-monthly program. So please save the date on the 22nd of July for the next Space Café Space Café Law Breakfast, where we have Elena Morozova and Andrei Mishtal.
Yes, thanks. Yes, so if you like this program, and I hope you do, please spread the word. You know, it's really interesting talking with incredible people about interesting events and demystifying it. And next time on the 22nd of July, Elena Morozova, who is just an extraordinary person, the head of Intersputnik, will join us, and Andrei Mishtal, who was formerly the chair of legal subcommittee. I work with him closely on some of the UN work now, and he's also at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Poland, and just so knowledgeable about the diplomacy of space as well as the law. Come and join us on the 22nd. Please, Alex and Jenni, also come and join us as well in that discussion, and I hope others will. So we'll see you, everybody, on the 22nd of July at another cafe in another country, either in Warsaw or in Moscow. We shall see.
We'll see. Yeah, absolutely. So, but we have many other events are prepared in between. So this evening, if you can't get enough from space, and I know we all can't get enough, we have the next Space Café Balkan by the Serbian Casual Space people at 6 p.m. And they talk to the CEO of Endurosat, the CEO of Endurosat in Bulgaria. Interesting discussion that will be. And tomorrow we will launch our first Space Café Spain by Isan Perez, and that will be in Spanish for all of you that speak that language. Not me, unfortunately. Next week I will talk in my 33 minutes with another one that you guys know very well in UN COPUOS, Professor Thomas Schildknecht. And we will talk about how we can protect this keyhole to the universe from an astronomer's point of view. And then next week we have another edition of the Space Café Australia by Annie Handmer. And so happy to have Annie today also in the green room and really slightly coming on stage here. So that will be at 10 a.m. Central European time, so 6 p.m. Is it 6? I think 6 p.m. Australia. And then on the 4th of June, we will have, as you mentioned her, Elena Morozova as the host of the Space Café Russia. And she will talk with Viktor Strelitz about the ITU frequency coordination for Russia. And then follow up by Space Cafe with Dr. Cassandra Stair in this 33 minutes on the 9th of June. And we have also the next Moriba's Vox Populi by my good friend Dr. Moriba Jah on the 10th of June planned. And that will be about space tourism for everyone. So we will have astronauts, we have people from Space Zero on the panel. So it's a typical discussion as, hey, how to go to space or as a normal person. And as you know, Moriba, it will be a fantastic discussion. All events are online on Eventbrite. As always, we would like to hear your feedback, so please check in with us on Twitter, on Facebook, or LinkedIn. Don't forget to sign up to our daily or bi-weekly newsletters. If you like to treat yourself with something special, become a Space Watcher today. And thanks for the order, Chris, that came in during the session here. We need your support. So please take your credit card and visit our fan shop at shop.spacewatch.global. Thank you all very much for your interest today. Thank you, Jenni and Alex, for the inspiring chat and being our guest. Stephen, thank you. How has this program happened to you today? So anything from your end to add?
Well, just to say, it just gets better and better, and I enjoyed it very much. Jenni and Alex know that we had so much more that we wanted to talk about, and of course, time flies. Yeah. So we'll have to come back, yes, and do it all again at some stage. So thanks. I'll see everybody on the 22nd of July, and before that, there's lots to see on SpaceWatch.Global, and also. Everybody, I encourage you to watch, as Jenni said, the live streaming of Legal Subcommittee for the next 2 weeks. You really will see law creation, law discussion in action. And I think that's something that really brings it to the reality for everybody. So thanks again.
We will try to cover as much as we can. So if you guys want to spread out the words, don't forget us. Our SpaceWatch.Global is always a platform that is happy to distribute the content. Then our thanks again to the team, to the entire team behind the scenes for doing their great job, event by event again. And I hope you all will stay safe, stay healthy. Thanks for joining us. Hope to see you this evening, tomorrow, next week, whenever. Or visit us on our website, follow us on social media, and don't forget, become a Space Watcher. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Take good care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe. Stay safe. Bye-bye.